would use the term persona, that there's sort of this pastoral persona that we put on, and not everyone has a stained glass voice or prays necessarily with the same kind of fervor or specificity. And we all have different gifts and graces. But I think that to tie it into the bishop's sense of character and integrity, that there is a sameness, that no matter where I am, whether I'm in front of my congregation in the pulpit, or in front of a committee meeting, or leading a Bible study, or with my family, or in my car by myself, or in my office with the door closed, and in front of my computer, I should be the same. And so what boundaries, as he talked about, that he was quoting Brene Brown, do we need to have in place in order to be able to be effective? And not only effective, but reflective of Christ's call and claim on our lives. I think that is integral to myself. It's what separates me from other professionals. I think that I have a personal relationship with Christ and feel called by Him. But is that always reflected in the decisions I make when I'm by myself? And I think that my experience has been, unfortunately, that it is not. That we find ourselves challenged and no one's watching, so it's what I do, no harm, no foul. There is an epidemic, I think, of pornography among clergy, not just United Methodism, but other denominations as well. I think there's an equal temptation and propensity to get caught up in video gaming. And both of those feed pleasure centers of the brain. So how do we wrestle with that? How do we deal with that? How do I say no to what would be an easy yes and maintain my integrity and my character? I think that's a question.
To me, it also ties into self-care. If we're looking for, if we're getting our needs met in healthy ways, then we don't go getting our needs met in unhealthy ways.
Right.
So I think self-care ties back into that, and also who we are, back to the sense of identity. Yeah. When we have a solid sense of identity, when we're sure that we are a child of God and that we are called by God, then we act that way wherever we are. Maybe with more levity in personal private situations, maybe a little in a pulpit or in a worship setting with a little more seriousness, sometimes with levity as well, but the essence of who we are gets carried into all of those situations. It's scary to me to think that we put on, it's like putting on a robe, we put on a pastoral identity, and that I don't think that's not healthy. That's not good, and it leads us to doing the things that you talked about with pornography and the gaming, and that it's an escape. It's an escape.
It's also a temptation. So how do we deal with temptation? Some temptations we're more easily able to field and deal with. Others we're not. And temptation, I think, comes in lots of different forms, whether it's the computer screen or the video game. Sometimes it's dessert.
You've stopped preaching and gone to meddling.
Sugar is addictive.
Yes, it is. Very well aware of that.
But and it goes back to self-care. Mm-hmm. And so I'm able to say no here. I'm able to say no there. Why do I not say no here? Mm-hmm. The evil that I would do, yet the good that I would, I do not. Mm-hmm. Those are Paul's words. Mm-hmm. Paraphrase of them. And so. And it gets back to my identity. Who do I see myself to be? How do I see myself functioning? If we get into overextension, which is not good self-care, we become human doings, and yet we are human beings. When Moses, conscripted into service to go back down to Egypt, found himself reluctantly agreeing, he finally said, well, okay, I'll go, but who shall I tell him sends me? And God's words were the verb to be. Tell them I am. We're human beings, not human doings, but so much of our identity, I think, as clergy, is complexed around what we do. And the conference doesn't help that with our dashboards that people are held accountable to. But I think there's another temptation there. Do I sacrifice self to go do this and not take care of myself? And so I think it cuts into every aspect of our lives. So I do think, how are we setting healthy and appropriate boundaries for ourselves? How do we make ourselves accountable to another? If I'm watching internet porn, do I go to a trusted colleague and say, look, I feel like I'm getting in over my head here. Let me tell you what I've been doing. That's a way of holding myself accountable. But then, do I need to go and self-report? And what's my DS's response going to be to me at that point? Do they take their pastoral hat off and I lose my shepherd and they put on the administrative official of the annual conference hat, which means, okay, I now have to respond to this. How do we deal with that as clergy? What systems are in place for us to take care of ourselves, to be able to get help? Sometimes we may need help for some of the behaviors that we get into without fear of recrimination. And how do we as clergy become not only proclaimers of good news and God's love and grace, but how do we then expose ourselves to maybe being recipients of that? And does the institution have it for us? Grace and forgiveness and mercy. And I define grace as getting what we don't deserve, and mercy is not getting what we do deserve. And so how do we deal with that?
Well, and my question would be, you've put online pornography, video gaming, and food addiction all in the same categories.
Yeah. Temptation.
Okay, and there's a stigma with online pornography that somehow that's more wrong than video gaming or food addiction or exercise addiction.
Right.
What's wrong with having outlets to kind of decompress, to get away from everything, just to kind of zone out, as some would say? What's wrong with giving into those some?
Well, when you give in to some, it becomes a slippery slope, and then you get lost. So it comes back to what Nancy keeps bringing up, which is our identity. Who am I? And who am I called to be? And how often do we revisit identity as we are engaged in ministry? What forms or formats are available for us as clergy as part of self-care to be able to revisit our call, to revisit our sense of identity, to revisit God's claim on our life, and how difficult that becomes as we seek to be about God's work, because it is not easy. It's not easy being a clergy person, and knowing that there are antagonists in the congregation who are after us, who are seeking to undermine our ministry, and we have to get up and proclaim good news. And the last thing I feel like doing on Sunday morning is getting up there and offering hope and encouragement to some of those people that I'm really angry with. And what do I do with my anger?